back to our Multiply series, part 8. So far in this series, we've been in the book of Genesis, and here's one thing that's really been standing out to us. Okay, there's this pattern in Genesis so far, and it goes like this. Us, humanity, we sin. There's consequences for our sin, but do you know what? We find out that God has this heart to see the world restored perfectly, just how He created it in the first place. And last week, we were introduced to a character called Abraham, and what God said is that He wants to restore the world through His people, and He chose Abraham to start this off, and that restoration would come through Abraham's descendants. If you read further on in Genesis, what you'll find out is that this plan for restoration is going great. There's been so many people come together and formed this nation called Israel. However, today we're going to skip into Exodus. Okay, and if you read the first two chapters, Exodus, what you're going to find is that this nation called Israel has suddenly come into slavery in Egypt. Okay, and what's important to realise in these first two chapters is that's 400 years of history. Now, if I was an Israelite, I would be starting to question, has God really made this promise that we are the nation that's going to see the world restored, when all I'm getting is this work of the Egyptians? However, if you look in Genesis 15, God knows that this is going to happen, and He actually tells Abraham, He says, your descendants are going to be slaves in a far off country, but I'm going to bring you out of that slavery and see you blessed. Now, today we're going to look at how God fulfills that promise. As we continue to read Exodus, we soon find out that the Israelites are not only under slavery but heavy persecution. The Egyptian leader Pharaoh, who was like the king of the country at the time, was a really evil man, and what he decided is that every firstborn Israelite child should be killed. Okay, and this is where we are introduced to one of the central characters, Moses, and this is a story you're probably quite familiar with from Sunday school. But essentially, Moses' mum wants to save Moses' life by sticking him in a basket and sailing him down the River Nile. And God orchestrates it in such a way that Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses, the baby, and takes him into Pharaoh's house and raises him like an Egyptian. Later on in the story, we find that although Moses has been raised Egyptian, he has this connection with Israelites, and he ends up actually standing up for an Israelite and kills this Egyptian, standing up for his own people. Because he's done this, he has to flee Egypt, and he ends up in the wilderness, and that's where he starts to get to know God. And what we're about to read is the account of Moses and the burning bush. So if you In the passage you've just read, Exodus 3, Moses asked two amazing questions, and they're very simple. They go like this. He asked God, who am I and who are you? Do you know, these two questions alone are so fundamental to our relationship with God. If we can get these right, then we've got a firm foundation on anything we do for God. So question one, who am I? God gives a funny answer. He just says, I am the God who's with you. So what that says to me is that actually God's saying, don't worry about who you are. If you've got fears, if you've got worry, don't worry who you are. I am with you. And actually it's about Him and His power rather than ours. And the second question, who are you, God? God simply answers, I am. Again, it can sound quite abstract to begin with, but basically what God is saying is, I am who I am. I am incomparable. You can't compare me to anyone who's ever lived or anyone that's going to live. I am beyond anything you can dream or imagine. I am incomparable. And you know, Exodus is a story. What it reveals is we have a God who is a God that loves to be with His people and will continue to be with His people, and also a God that is so powerful that He's not only going to be with us, but He has the power to make the impossible happen through us, as long as we can be like Moses and simply, even if we're scared, come close to God, hear what He's got to say, and obey. So the story continues. Moses goes back to Egypt and he faces Pharaoh. He says, let my people go. Pharaoh says, no way, Jose. And what happens for the next few chapters is there's this power battle going on, because Pharaoh essentially thinks he's like some sort of God, okay, and he's got this power. And actually, our God, Yahweh, Elohim, all these names, the great I am, absolutely trouses him. And there's these plagues that go on. You can read all about it. You maybe remember it from Sunday school, but essentially God brings devastation to the Egyptians because Pharaoh has basically picked a power battle with him that he's not going to win. This takes us to the part of the story called Passover. Passover is something you may well be familiar with, but essentially the story goes like this. God speaks to Pharaoh and he warns him, Pharaoh, if now, even after all these plagues, if you still don't let my people go, I'm going to send the angel of death that's going to come, sweep through Egypt and kill every firstborn Egyptian child. But yet, Pharaoh, even still at this point, refuses to let the people go. And that's what happened. God sends this angel of death that brings devastation to Egypt, and every firstborn child is killed. And you know, this is an important lesson for us, because so far we've spoke about blessing, we've spoke about Abraham was given a promise that he was going to be blessed, and we see God fulfill that. But we also find out about God that as if he gives us a warning that something is going to come that's going to harm us or devastate us, if we don't pay attention to that, we're in big trouble, because he will follow through on the judgment that he talks about as well. But what does he say to the Israelites? He says to the Israelites, he gives this strategy that protects them from the angel of death. And this isn't because the Israelites are better than the Egyptians, but it's because they listened and obeyed to God's instructions. Okay, and this is what the instruction was, that they were to slaughter a lamb and put the blood of that lamb on their door handles of the house, so that when the angel comes and knows what houses to visit and what houses not to visit. Okay, it's pretty grim thinking. Imagine you're living with mum and dad and brothers and sisters, and you've got this pet lamb in the garden. I don't know what you want to call him, maybe mint sauce, yeah? Maybe that's his name. But anyway, you love this lamb, you've grown up with as a pet almost, and then all of a sudden a member of your family, maybe your mum or dad, takes it in and they kill it in front of you and start putting the blood on the door handle. You're going to be devastated, because you're thinking, why did that lamb have to die? That's an awful thing. A lamb is the most innocent, beautiful thing. But maybe your parent would turn around to you and say, well, do you know, this lamb had to die in place of your brother or your sister or you. That was going on in Passover, and that surely must remind you of what Jesus did for us and his sacrifice. Okay, to wrap up this part of the story for us this morning, Pharaoh does eventually let Israel free Egypt, but not for long. He changes his mind again and he decides he wants to kill them all. And we all know the story. Israel chases through the desert with Egypt following them, and they hit this Red Sea, and the sea parts, Israel goes through, and the Egyptians try and follow, and the waves come crashing in, and yeah, the victory is won again for Israel. And you know, Exodus is such an amazing story, particularly this part of it, where it just shows, again, key elements of God's commitment to us as people, and historically to those guys as well. And the stories continued throughout Scripture. They keep coming back to it because they keep wanting to remind themselves of God's goodness, of his commitment, and his power as well, the way that he just intervened when they needed him most. How about, to finish off this morning, spend a little bit of time with God, and let's make it personal. Let's thank God for who he is. Let's thank him that he is the God that comes and intervenes on our behalf, that saves and rescues us, and maybe ask him to bring to mind some of the times that he has come through for you personally, where you've been in a sticky situation and life's been difficult, and you find that God has actually brought you through that tough time and out as a better person on the other side. Okay, and maybe we want to share that with each other as a group this morning as well.